Hey everyone, just before we kick off today, we'd like you to go to the chat and tell us or ask us a question. So just to see that everything's working, if someone could ask us a question in the chat, what's your favorite ice cream flavor since it's such a warm day? Oh, hi everyone, I'm Chris Horton. I'm forgetting my manners already.
A salted caramel. Delicious.
All right, great. Everything seems to be working, so I'm going to kick off. Good afternoon and welcome to our third webinar in our summer series for Buyer's Remorse. As I just said, my name is Chris Horton. I'm one of the directors at LACE and I will be your host today. The first webinar in the series, Webinar 1, focused on the causes of buyer's remorse. Webinar 2 focused on the area of people and adoption. If you missed either of these recordings, they're available on our website and you can get access to them. Today in Webinar 3, we're going to focus on maximising our return on investment for HR technology. We have a great set of panelists. First off, I would like to welcome.
Smooth with the technology there.
Very smooth.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Rebecca Addison, also known as Bex. I'm a senior manager at LACE. I've got a history of working with HR systems and HR transformation and payroll systems as well, actually. So I'm used to putting new systems into complex organisations and helping those businesses try and work out how to get the best out of that solution once it's in. I've seen a fair few implementations go in and then fall flat. So it's all about trying to make sure that you build on that momentum once you've gone live. So interested to be talking about that today. Thanks,
Bex, and great to have you in the room with me. I feel like I've got good company today, which is great. Okay, next up, I've got Aaron. Aaron, you are stepping in for Sian because she is ill, so thank you very much for helping us out last minute. I believe many people will know you already, but if you could do a brief introduction, that would be fantastic.
Of course, Chris, thanks. And yeah, as I say, you're standing in for Sian today, who unfortunately has come down ill. So anyone dialing in expecting Sian, apologies, you have me instead. I'm the managing director, co-founder here at LACE. And as you may have heard in some of the earlier webinars, this area of buyer's remorse is a real passion of mine. Spent a long time delivering big programs of work, some tech, some not. Really excited to talk about return on investment today and how really to make sure you track it and make the most of that money that you've invested and how you make sure you get that return. So looking forward to, this is the third one together, Chris. Looking forward to it today.
Thank you, Aaron. And last but certainly not least is Dan Bolshaw. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today. How's the weather in Manchester?
Oh, the weather in Manchester is typically overcast and grey, unfortunately, but it is very, very warm. And I agree with the comment in the chat about salted caramel ice cream is also my favourite. So yeah. But yeah, thank you for having me on the webinar today. So yeah, Dan Bolshaw from Oracle. My role is a bit of a strange one. So I sit in a transformation world where I support customers through vendor selection, implementation and beyond, using my experience as being an Oracle customer. So prior to Oracle, I worked for Sainsbury's Supermarkets in the UK, where I led part of that HR transformation journey that we went on. So yeah, great to meet you all.
Fantastic and great to have everyone on. Just wanted to say another welcome, because we've had a number of people join while we have been talking. So welcome to the third webinar on buyer's remorse, all around maximising return on investment for HR technology. Let's jump to our questions. And first off, I would love to go to you, Aaron. And really I wanted to focus around what do we think are the key things that you need to do around return on investment, and really how do you get a focus on a value case, and how do you make sure that you've got that you really understand the benefits in relation to that?
Great, thanks, Chris. I'll kick us off and we'll see where we go with it. So I think one of the things really I always think about when you're kicking off a piece of work like this is, what do you value as the client? What do you and your teams value? What do your stakeholders value? And trying to articulate that for me is the first step. Some of that clearly is financial, and that's the business case element. That's the piece that, return on investment, NPV, costs of licensing, all those lovely things, right? Implementation costs, etc. But so much of the return on investment, as we've talked about on buyer's remorse earlier, comes down to whether the expectations of the system or the change are delivered at the end. And quite often those are things that are values beyond just the financial. So that might be around experience, how people experience the system and how they engage with it. Could be things like tackling some of the attrition rates in some of your year one attrition. It could be access to information to allow for better data-driven business decisions. But understanding, one, what the range of those are, and two, who values what are the key elements, I think, for creating that value case and therefore understanding the benefits. And we're going to go on and talk a bit about tracking benefits, tracking that return on investment. How do you ensure you sustain it and keep it going? So in order to do that, you need to make sure you're focusing on the right things with the right groups. And that's where we spend a lot of time on these kind of pieces of work, really helping clients articulate and understand, what does the business want? What does HR as a profession and the users want? What do employees and line managers need? And what are they valuing as part of this change?
And Aaron, you touched on, spending the time with stakeholders. So at the start of the program and throughout the program, how do you see that work once you shift into a BAU environment?
Great question, Chris, because I think this is quite often the bit that's missed, right? We spend a lot of time up front with the board and the program, getting it ready. We track it through the program. And then that transition to BAU, quite often the original business case gets forgotten somewhere. There's not an owner, there's not someone tracking it or looking at it. And some of those benefits in a big program will come later. They'll come after go live, right? That's when they are delivered. So I think there's an element here of ensuring that there is someone to pick up as BAU, to make sure that they own it and have that line of sight, and that you're regularly reflecting on, why did we do this? What were we trying to achieve? Have we done it? And have that dialogue on a recurring basis. Quite often, we find ourselves working with clients thinking about replacing systems or replacing service providers because the original intent of why they got there has been lost in corporate history, right? Why it was done originally has been lost, and there's not been a strong ownership around that. And sometimes you end up not replacing the system, not replacing the service provider, but simply refreshing people's memories as to what you were trying to achieve and why, and then adjusting on it. So very, very important to make sure there is that catcher, if you like, in the BAU side. Perfect.
Before I jump to Bex, we just want to remind people that you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and we would actively encourage you to do that. You can do that by going to the Q&A tab and asking us a question. We will do our best throughout the process to answer the question amongst the panel while we're answering other questions. Otherwise, if it's a separate question that's not relevant to the topics, we'll pick it up at the end. Bex, just feeding on what Aaron has said, any other points that you'd like to make?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the key things, and it is sort of picking up on what Aaron said, is around tailoring that value to your stakeholders and to your audience. So it's really understanding, those key people across the business and what they want out of the system, and making sure that you keep driving those messages back home to them in terms of what the improvements and how the system has helped the organization. So if you think about from the CEO's perspective, for example, he might be thinking about how's this system helping me build competitive advantage? How is it improving my workforce productivity? What are the kind of broader impacts that this system is having on the business as a whole? And then as you kind of drive down and you think about, okay, for the CHRO, those issues and those values and the things that they want to get out of this transformation are going to be slightly different. So if you start tailoring those messages to those audiences, you can help push through what that value is. So, CHRO will be thinking about how is this helping me deliver my people strategy, or how is it helping me understand my workforce better? And a great system will help them do that, and it will help bring those changes across the business. And again, not forgetting IT, obviously, because they're important. Your chief technology officer, how's this system bringing better compliance, better data security? How's it helping me meet my GDPR requirements? All those kind of things. And to Aaron's point about business leaders, how's this affecting my team? So if you can kind of drive those messages home and say to them, this system is helping build this productivity within your team, it's improving your ways of working, and keep pushing those messages through, it will help drive those values. And I think it's also about understanding that there are different types of value, again, that come out of these sort of transformations and system implementations. So to Aaron's point, you've got the financial stuff, you've got potential headcount reductions and those kind of efficiencies, but you've also got things like productivity gains and operational improvements, things like that, as well as those experience gains that we'll talk about a bit more.
Great, thank you, Bex. Jumping to the next question. So I'm always interested, Dan, when you're putting in a new HR technology, you decide what the scope of the technology is, and you put all of these different components in place. As you're going through the process, different releases are happening from the different companies throughout the year. Also, different requests are coming in from different business units or different people within the business that they would like to do. We need to, obviously think about how we then manage that change. So I'm really interested in your view on how do you best manage, the functional change, both throughout the life of an implementation, but also afterwards when you're moving into BAU.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? I think, to break it into two sections, you've got the original implementation, which is actually a little bit easier because there's generally a project, you've got a scope that's clearly defined at the beginning and tweaked as you go along, but there's an end date to that process, if you like. Post implementation, I think, is where we see a lot of people go, well, what next? How do I maintain the momentum? And you're right, Chris, Oracle, as amongst other vendors, we release software on a quarterly basis. So you as a customer are getting new features every couple of months. And it's quite difficult as a customer to go, well, what are the things that I want to turn on? What are the things that I'm not bothered about? What are the things that I need to be worried about because it's a functional change to payroll, as an example? So I think it's about really understanding release notes, can't emphasize enough understanding what's coming up on that roadmap from the vendor, mapping that to business requirements. So using that same methodology that you used in the implementation to figure out what are the current business problems that we either haven't solved through the initial release, or we put in the car park for post implementation. So it's understanding what new stuff is coming down the map that can support that. And then really it's working with the business and maintaining that really good HR tech business stakeholder relationship post go live. And actually, I think post go live is much more important because, I think as Aaron said before, sometimes the foot can come off the gas a little bit, and well, project's done. Let's hang our coats up. We're all done now. Whereas in reality, the hard work starts post go live. So I think for me, it's keeping the momentum of roadmap releases, keeping engaged with your stakeholders, and understanding what are the problems that we're trying to fix as an organization, and how does that map to the roadmap from my software vendor?
And Dan, do you think companies are doing enough to identify up front the level of support that's necessary so that when you move from implementation or a defined program to BAU, that the right people are actually in place?
Yeah, I think it is a struggle, and most of the people on this call will know that the war for talent that we've got is pretty hot in that HR technology space, and there's risk involved in you train someone up on how to use the system, they get really good at that, they've done a project, and then they can go off and potentially find another role. So I think it's about forming that team post project, having really clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities as well, and empowering those people that are, let's face it now, experts in both the system and the business requirements, and empowering those people to go and fix business problems. I think if you can do that and maintain that momentum, and I'll keep saying that because it's such an important point, maintain the momentum as you go forward, and make sure that people have got a clear, why am I here? I think is super important.
Great, thank you, Dan. Aaron.
There's lots to pick up on from Dan's points there. I think that I love that point about maintaining momentum. We talk a lot about change doesn't start until after go live, and particularly with an HR implementation, that sort of first year of annual cycle that happens afterwards is when you really flush out a lot of the things that you hope are going to happen and may or may not happen. So really focusing on that. I think one of the things around this space for me is, the move to cloud, and some of the people on this call will already have cloud systems in place. Others will be thinking about moving to it still. When you take that leap, you are moving to a position where you're buying into a service, right? You're buying into a continuous improving functional environment. That's part of your business case, right? You may have less need for some of the technical capability you had before. You're going to focus more on security and data and integrations. You need less of the configuration type and customization type help, but you are also getting a system that is continually pushing improvement to you. One of the things I think when you're looking at your business case is thinking about, okay, how am I allowing for that? Because that's a great asset. That's a great capability to have as part of putting in a new system. And so, are you enabled to allow that to happen? Some of which is having the right skills, as Dan was saying, and capability. Some of it is knowing who owns what, right? So is it IT? Is it HR? Who gets to decide? And we see that a lot in terms of stuff that falls between the gaps between the two. But also, and I think really importantly, on making sure you get return on investment, that part of the business case is a clear governance of how to implement that change. So say, for example, there's a new skills capability launched or a new part of talent that is launched that you just get as part of your licensing agreement. Who gets to decide that is good for us? Who gets to talk about, and drive, how do we change things to put it in place? And, and how do you make sure that you have the capacity and capability to take that and actually implement it in your business and get that continuous improvement benefit? Because a big part of this is continuous improvement. So that quite often is a part that I think we see where it stalls at that point of go live, and that capacity, capability, or the governance isn't in place, and therefore that return on investment isn't realized.
So we've had a number of interesting questions coming through, and please, please keep them coming. I'm going to jump to Kate's question because I think it's related to what we're already talking about. So Kate has been, and thank you, Kate, for your question. Kate has said, as a business, we're moving from a project to a product model with our tech team. How have you seen this benefit other organizations when it comes to ROI on systems? Dan, do you want to try that one? And then...
Yeah, I certainly can. So prior to Oracle, I was actually at Sainsbury's where we went through that exact same change, which was HR technology used to be owned by HR, which made perfect sense during the sort of implementation project. We then moved to a product management style program. So essentially what this meant is that we had product managers that sat technically within IT, but they sort of had one foot in IT and one foot in HR. And those guys were absolutely experts at translating business requirements into technical speak. And I think there was a clear definition then of what's their role. So their role is to not just sit at the end of the table when HR are making a decision. I think it's key for them to actually be involved in the decision. So I don't know, take, for example, you wanted to rethink how you did bonus payments as an example. That product person should be involved in that entire end-to-end discussion with HR as a technical expert going, have we thought about this? Could we try that? How would this work? Because actually that means when it comes to doing that implementation of the change, they can translate that into something that's really articulate for the technical people to go and complete the activity. And we are seeing more and more companies move to a product management style management of HR technology. And it's certainly something that I think we'll see more and more people do over the coming years, and in part due just to the efficiencies that you can gain through that style of working.
Yeah,
hopefully that answers.
Sorry, I think I'd agree with that as well, and actually touches on a lot of the things that I was going to mention further on in the discussion around sort of making sure you've got clear product owners driving that change and owning that within the business.
And I know when I was working at Vodafone, is exactly what we ended up doing, you know, with productizing the whole thing. Anything else, Aaron, that you want to add to that? You're on mute, mate.
The first of the three. Wow. No, I think it just reinforces those things that we were talking about, right? Because I think it is the product owners, but I think to activate them and for them to be successful, you need the sponsor and the HR side. Because there's always a sponsor on the IT side, right? There's always that exists, but I think quite often who is going to navigate and sponsor it through the HR side is the bit that typically is missing. And then you can end up with great product owners, as you say, Daniel, Dan, who can translate functionality, but you know, it's then getting it done, right, and getting the change made and the budget behind it and the resources behind it. So good questions, and I'm looking at some of the other questions, Chris, coming in as well. There's some great ones in there too.
So let's jump to our next question, and then we'll answer the others as they come up. Okay, so looking at question number 3, really, when we're looking at the different changes that are happening throughout the life of the program and through BAU, who should be accountable for managing the change, but also monitoring the benefits, and you know, who effectively do you need to work with? Bex, I'd love you to start on this one, please.
Great, and it leads really nicely on from that conversation that we were just having, actually, because I think for me there's sort of 3, I guess, core pillars, and we've touched upon them all. Really, it's around ownership of the product, it's about governance, and making sure that that product owner is supported and has got that, you know, senior weight behind it, and then it's about that day-to-day management and how do you make sure that you're staying on top of your system configuration and those sort of day-to-day requests that are coming in, and they're all very interlinked, and I think they kind of, you know, sit together. And what's really important about that is, back to that point that we've already talked about, is that you need that product owner role to sort of sit cross-functionally between HR and IT, so they've got feet in both camps, as it were, so they can kind of have that nuanced expertise that you need to have around an HRIS system and understand that data set, which is quite different from some of the other data sets within an organisation. But also to that point around understanding HR as a whole and the way that the processes work, and you know what sits behind all of that, but then having that IT background as well to understand about data security, how you manage data, how you configure systems, you know, understand reporting, those kind of things. So you need someone that kind of has that cross hat across both sides of the business, and can also build relationships across both. So that's, you know, that's really critical. So as you have all these changes coming through and these daily requests into the system, someone that's got the kind of authority and the skill set to manage stakeholders across. So that's what you need. And then you also need someone, you know, you need a team behind them that have got that sort of day-to-day skill set to manage that. And maybe you'll look at, you know, one of the other options is to have an AMS, so an application management service, to bring those in to help you with that sort of day-to-day management of your system. But you can put a great in-house team together as well that kind of can do the configuration, can do the basic changes to the system. And then you need the sort of governance structure around it to make sure that any of those changes are coming through, are being prioritised and thought about across the whole business, rather than just for HR or just for IT. You need to think about how they holistically affect the whole business, and therefore how they are prioritised across everything and in the full suite of things that are going on. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then Dan, some additional points.
So I think who's doing the technical work is less worrying for me, because you've got multiple options for that, right? You've got the managed service, so you outsource it. You stick it in IT and you let the technical people do it, or you train the people in HR to do it, and they might have been doing that through the project. I think the important thing for me is understanding that why. And it kind of touches on the theme we've ended up on today, really, is the why. So I think back to that product management question, who's the person in the organization that has the final decision on, are we doing the first thing or are we doing the second thing? We can only do one. So we've got capacity this week to do one thing. Which thing is it? And why are we doing it? I think that's the most important aspect of it, because particularly in the years post-implementation, you can very quickly end up in a state where you've got bugs and fixes that you need to do that are, the output of the implementation program. You've got all of these new people looking at the system going, we want this, we want this, we want this. You've got new features coming in from the vendor on a quarterly basis, and having that person to sort of be the air traffic control steward, if you like, to go, right, we've got all of this work that we need to do. How do we prioritize it? And how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing at the right time in the right order? So yeah, for me, it's less, I'd be less worried about who's doing the technical elements and be more worried about who's the person that's making the decisions on what we're doing.
I'm going to jump to one of the questions, and that's from an anonymous attendee. The question is, can you share a success story or case study where an organization has significantly improved their return on investment by optimizing their HR technology? I know I've got particular ones, but I'm going to jump to each of you. Aaron, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah, and I think there's several of these, right? And I think I'm going to pick one which might be of interest to some of the people on the call who are already on the cloud side, because I think sometimes you think, I've done that work, it's there, right? And I think we worked with a client who was quite an early adopter of cloud. They had built out a really good platform. They had a good understanding of IT, a good understanding of HR, what their accountabilities were. And they'd done all that great work, but one of the things that they hadn't optimized around it was the operating model. Both the support piece we're talking about now, but also some of the operating models. So they had this great system that was enhancing their processes, but they had lots of players playing in the processes. So they weren't optimizing the way they were being executed, and therefore the flow of data through the system. And so by tweaking some of that operating model element, we were able to sort of increase that return on investment around the technology, because it was seen as technology is breaking down, it's not quite doing what we want, all those kind of messages we've spoken about in the buyer's remorse earlier. But actually, in actual fact, we were able to do is refocus some of the operating model, this point on accountabilities, clarify that. And as a result, then the right flow of data was going into the system with the right people. And therefore, the data coming out and the perceived value of that system was much higher.
And Aaron, in your experience, do you think you should be focusing on operating model as part of the design and then bring that to life? Or is it more around then tweaking as you get later, as you move into BAU and you've got many parts of the system going live? Is it really then retweaking and making sure that that's working as expected?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a great passion for operating model anyway, so I would say this, but yes, I think you need to look at it, not least because if you're thinking about nothing else other than security and roles and accountabilities in the system as you build it, the simpler you can make it going in, the easier it is to codify, the easier it is to build and test, let alone all the things we were just talking about on benefits. So I do think if you've got the opportunity, make sure that stream is at least investigated early and in parallel. And if you can, execute it. And if you can't, make sure you have a plan for doing it on the other side of the go live of the system.
I think that's a really good point for everyone to remember around operating model. Anyone else want to add to that? Otherwise, we can jump to the next question.
I'll jump in really quickly and just say, I think the other thing you can think about around HR technology is almost like break it down into smaller chunks. So obviously, if you look at your whole solution as a whole, that that's quite a big piece to try and work out where you drive and benefit. But if, for example, you look at your recruitment process, that's quite an easy one to get a return on investment on. When you've got kind of really complex and long recruitment processes, you put in a nice cloud system that can simplify that process. It improves your candidate experience, it improves your hiring manager experience. That's quite an easy way to work out some return on investment, breaking it into smaller chunks.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's jump to the next question. So looking at the next question, we're focused around where do you differentiate on functionality? And really, I guess one of the subs around this is looking at experience layers and whether or not we should be thinking about that kind of thing. Aaron, can you kick us off with this one?
Yeah, it's a couple of things, I guess, on this particular piece, because it comes back to what Dan mentioned there, which is the why, right? So why are you doing this? So coming back and thinking about that, and for us, a lot of the time, that question nowadays is around what's the experience you're trying to deliver. That's a lot of the why, right? Especially in this heightened talent environment. What are you going to differentiate on? What are the things that you want to really make differential in the experience, either as an employee trying to transfer internally and move around and move talent around, or as a candidate coming into your organization, making that as simple as possible and attracting the right skills and right talent. And what we often find is that one system can't fit all of those things, right? And so we'd always try and recommend from a return on investment that you put as much into the single system as possible and you keep that as integrated as possible. And often if you've got one in place, building on that is normally the best way to keep your costs controlled and build out. But quite often there are things that you just want to make sure that you differentiate on and the technology isn't quite there in the core system yet. Or you have other systems inside your organization being used by other functions that are a priority for you to also use as well, rather than buying another one. So, and some of those examples are, as we talk about, an experience layer. So that quite often is coming up now, and often that's not about the experience layer for HR, because a lot of the core systems can now do that, but it's around the line manager experience. So making it simpler for a line manager who may have procurement, finance, front office systems, and HR all vying for time and all with separate systems. So how do you make that simple? Can be really differential on your business case. It can really lead to productivity in the front line, and so on. So that's one of the areas that to pick up on. And I think coming back to that experience layer again, I think that ability to have both the systemic side of things, but also the knowledge base and the information all available at a single point of click is again one of the things we're seeing on where people are trying to turn the dial on return on investment. I guess the other elements of things that still come up quite often are elements around things like onboarding and that whole candidate onboarding experience. One of the big dials to turn on return on investment, especially in the recruitment and talent space, is getting people productive as fast as possible. So that time to productivity. And one of the best ways to do that is to start the process of onboarding as before someone starts, getting them culturally aligned, getting them bought into the understanding of the process and policies, and getting them bought into their buddies and mentors and everything before they start, so they hit the ground running and you can get them as productive as possible as soon as possible. And again, you may want to look at specialist technologies in there. One of the key things that we always think about though on return on investment is clearly the large technology platforms are continually pumping a lot of money into R&D. They're developing their functionality all the time. They're learning from the specialists in the market. And we've seen over the years how they've taken that, built it into their core systems. So one of the things you've got to consider is what's that lifespan of that going to be, and how long are you going to hold it for, and build that into your business case. Is it a 2-year thing to fix for a certain problem, or is it a lifetime thing before you then look at your systems and your core systems again, maybe 3-5 years down the line? So thinking about that life cycle is the other element on this as well.
And I think a great point, Aaron, around looking at what's happening in the rest of the organization to make it simpler for line managers, and the layer that can help to pull everything together there. And then definitely looking around the specifics, and really is a short-term investment or is it something that will be built out as a natural course of events because of the different vendors actually looking to build that out.
Mm-hmm.
Bex, your views?
I think when it comes to functionality and systems, it's about getting the basics right. I mean, getting the simple stuff just working seamlessly, I think it makes a big difference, right? So as when you're an employee organization, you want minimal manual processing, you want single sign-on to work effectively, you want all that good stuff just to be there and working and functioning. You just don't want it to be difficult. I think that's where, and that just helps drive up that adoption of the system. If it's simple, if it's straightforward, if people can engage with it, in the user interface, if it's clean, it's clear, those kind of things, the processes are straightforward, it all kind of ties together around making it a more efficient process for people. And you've got to think about those sort of interactions and integrations between the systems as well, so making sure that those are built robustly and that they are working seamlessly, so the data is flowing through the organizations into all the other systems, so it all kind of sits together quite nicely. So all of that is really important. But then to Aaron's point, really it's about how do you embed it, how do you drive that adoption, how do you get people to understand how to use the system. We've seen so many systems that have all this functionality and this great employee experience, but people don't really know how to use it properly. So over time, that kind of degenerated sort of system functionality isn't doing what it should do because we're not staying on top of it. So I think that change management element to it is really, really important as well.
Absolutely. We touched on a couple of points regarding one of the questions. So another anonymous attendee has asked, or has said, measuring ROI can be challenging for HR technology. Can you discuss some of the key metrics and data analysis techniques that organizations should use to evaluate the effectiveness of their HR technology investments? Now, I appreciate we've started, so we looked at recruitment, for example, and started to touch on some of the things there. Aaron, do you want to take a shot at answering this one?
So around the key metrics on return on investment, I think there's a number to cover, and I was reading this question just now and thinking about how to answer it because there's a lot of metrics.
Yeah.
That's what I was starting to think. I was like, okay, so yes, you're right. There are some that are quite obvious when you start looking at recruitment, right? So time to hire and those sorts of metrics, right? And quality of hire. We say time to hire is quite a blunt instrument. It gets used a lot, and actually, you don't want just any old hire. You want the right hire, and you want to ensure they stay. So we get into things then around attrition. First year attrition is a big thing, that we see a lot of in terms of measurement. But coming to specifically to the systems, I think there's a couple of things there. I think there is getting quite specific around asking line managers and executives in particular around their experience of using the system. A lot of the time you're building a system to give insight to the business. So actually building into your operations in HR, that ability to go out and regularly survey and ask that question, are you getting value? Is it delivering what you want? It surprised me how seldom that question is actually asked. And there are some things as well around specifics around adoption rates. One of the strange things with HR is you get a high completion on a lot of stuff because a lot of stuff is mandated. Doesn't mean people are adopting it, right? Doesn't mean they're emotionally connecting to it. Doesn't mean they're adopting the behaviors you want. And so thinking through behaviorally, what are the shifts you want to see? Maybe it's about line manager engagement with employees and moving to a continuous performance feedback, right? And making sure that is empowered. So you've got to then think through, okay, well, how do we measure that? Is that through spot surveys? Is that through some specific things that we can measure? Is that using some adoption technologies to understand the pathway that someone's taking through your core system, and where are they getting stuck? How far are they taking? What's the fastest route? Can you target certain things in that space? So there's a whole raft of different KPIs here, and we keep coming back, as Dan said, to the why. That is the key part of this, always is. But I think if you can understand that, then you can get to some of these metrics, start to bring them into, and then making sure that you embed how you ask them on a regular basis.
And I think that's the fundamental point, Aaron, is that you can easily come up with metrics for each of these areas, but it's not just about speed to achieve something or achieving something. It's why are you doing it and what are you truly trying to achieve, and making sure that that's coming up clearly.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorites that we always, and it comes to something that Bex was just talking about, is that point around, a lot of the time, the big ask that has kicked off a system implementation is, I want better insight into my business. Someone in the board has asked it, or the CEO has asked it, the CFO has asked it. And then what becomes is the metrics we measure by are, have we implemented it? And have we implemented it on time and on budget? Not are we producing the outcomes that we actually wanted to have to answer those questions. Hence why we see reporting pushed towards the end of a program rather than at the front, and all those sorts of lovely things that I can see my colleagues smiling at there on the call, right? So it is really understanding the why and making sure you don't lose focus on that as you go through what is a very tricky and hard program of work to get to the end.
And I think also really thinking through what's the underlying data that I need to actually measure the different metrics, and are we actually putting that in place? Because often, to start off with, you'll think you've got the right data, you've got the right integrations, you've chosen the right approach to actually go through, but often it's difficult because you don't actually, you miss something, or you don't have the piece of data that's absolutely fundamental. Okay, I'm going to jump to our next question, and then we will go through the remainder of the questions. Please take the time, if you've got any more questions, to ask them in the questions and answer tab. We're loving the questions that are coming through to date, so please ask us some more.
We are now final question.
We are on our final question. We are shooting through. So our final question really, to me, is all about what are the key takeaways that can help you improve your ROI. So really going through some of the key things that we've been talking about. Dan, I would love to start with you, please.
Thanks, Chris. So we've touched on a lot of these already, but I'm maybe going to talk about some of the things that we haven't managed to talk about today. So a big one for me is utilizing the relationship that you will have with the vendor. So post-implementation, you're 2 years into the contract, renewals coming up in a year, how are things getting on? I think the maintaining the relationship almost on a day-to-day basis with either a success manager or your account manager, or whoever it is on the vendor side, keeping them up to date with how are things going, how's it feeling, where are the challenges, making sure that the vendor is really, really aware of the things that aren't working, because actually those are the things that become super frustrating post-go live, where you just take it for granted that bug's never going to get fixed or whatever it might be. So I think maintaining the really strong relationship and partnership with your implementation, your vendor, is super, super key. And just making sure that that you're getting the most out of them, because let's face it, you're paying for that. You're paying for that service as part of your monthly, yearly subscriptions fees. So get the most out of it. Let them do their job, which is to help you be successful. Let them come in, let them speak to people, get them in front of the executive board. These people want to do that, so don't stop them. Let them do it, and let them face the brunt of whatever's going on, whether that's good or bad, I think is important.
I think that's a really great point. Bex, do you want to talk through some of your points?
For me, I think the most important way to keep driving that return on investment is to keep managing the change. And I think, it's all too often we've seen a system go in, it's dropped in, the project's finished, everyone walks away, hooray, we've done a great job, the project's delivered. And then to everything we've said throughout this whole conversation, it slowly starts to go downhill because things are not being adopted, the changes are not being embedded, and people are not taking up new functionality of the system. You get to the point where everyone's sitting there going, oh, it's a rubbish system, it's not doing what we want. Well, actually, that's not the case. The system is great. It's just not had that drive through the organisation to keep pushing the investment through. So I think it's about understanding that, you know, a cloud-based system is an investment. You need to keep investing in it. You need to have that team in place to keep pushing those changes through. You need to take on those quarterly releases, and you need to embed them in the organization as well. And that's the most important thing. Back to Dan's point, you know, the technical changes are not that difficult. It's the how do you push that through to the organization and make sure that people understand the benefits that those changes are going to bring to them.
And I think the fundamental that I'm hearing from you is really saying governance needs to be there and needs to be maintained.
Yeah.
Release management needs to be there, and we have the appropriate support people in place.
Yeah.
And we keep the focus
change
up
management
over
and the adoption stuff as well. It just keeps pushing that through. Don't leave that standing. Just keep pushing that changes through.
Perfect. And then last but certainly not least, Aaron.
There's not much else to add really to Bex there. I think I'd agree completely. Working this muscle of continually reviewing. I was surprised by how few projects that we revisit actually have measured anything post go live in terms of the original business case. I think there's a certain discipline that gets missed, and I think by doing that you will automatically help yourself realign what you need to focus on to ensure you do get that investment. So that's probably my number one takeaway, is make sure that you keep that focus on what you were trying to do, and you have the ability to continue to measure it afterwards. I know in the chat there's been a number of questions asked around some specific ROIs and things like that, and again I think we can try and answer some of those, but quite often they vary depending on what you're trying to achieve as a why, or the sectors you're in, and things. So I think we can only give sort of our experience, not necessarily some of the specific answers people might be looking for as they go through these questions.
And Aaron, interested in the comment that you've made. You know, I've seen it myself in a number of different organizations where, you know, a substantial amount of money has been spent implementing the system. There's been huge work on a business case or a value case to, you know, define the costs and benefits and the payback that's going to be achieved, etc. Then interestingly, there's been governance throughout the life of the program, but there's not been a role or an accountability identified to really take that forward. I'm interested in the views of everyone. Do you think that should sit within HR? Do you think that should sit within finance? Do you think it's a shared role that needs to happen to make sure? Dan, you're smiling, so I'm going to go to you. I'm not sure if that was a please don't ask me smile, or if that
well, number one, we're working on that answer at the moment. Me and my colleagues are working on a couple of things to share with our customers post later in the year. I think it's really difficult, isn't it? Where like I said before, the question we get asked a lot is, where should I sit this thing? So we've gone through the project. Where does it sit? And I don't think there is a one size fits all. Everybody's got an interest in it, you know, whether it's finance because they're the people that are paying the bill, whether it's procurement because they're the people on the hook for making sure they've got the best deal, whether it's IT because they're the ones doing the work, or ultimately whether it's HR because they're the ones that build the requirements and are probably using the system more than anyone else. I think it's getting all of those people together and being really clear, why did we do this? What's the thing that we're measuring to show that we've been successful? And I know that there's, like Aaron said, there's been a few questions. So to give you an example, during my time at Sainsbury's, before we went to the cloud, we used to operate like a big HR shared service centre in Manchester. You'll see why I'm in Manchester now. That building used to take upwardsly of 1 million phone calls a year from employees to conduct HR activity, whether that was changing their name because we didn't have self-service, or they've got a HR query or a payroll query. Post the transition to cloud, that was measured in, you know, the thousands and the low number of thousands. So straight away you go, well, we've saved so much money, and not just someone answering the phone, but the time it used to take for a manager to have to deal with a query, that's actually really difficult to measure, because it's time that you've already spent, accounted for. They're doing the day job, they're getting that done. Trying to get down to the measuring that, like, how many times did you have to ring the shared service center pre-implementation? And if you can get some metrics up front before you do the implementation, then when you come to the other end, you've almost got something to compare it to.
And I think that's a really great point, to make sure that you've got a snapshot at the start versus the end of the implementation. Absolutely.
Ownership of where it's just, I don't know. I mean, I think it would be good if people were fighting over it. I think all too often, no one wants ownership of it, and they're pushing it around the business. I think it would be great to be in a business where everyone does want to take ownership of it. But yeah, there's no one size fits all. It's different for every business, and I think you just have to work it through with your client as you go through. But yeah, cross-functionally, to be fair, I think it needs to go all the way around.
And I think absolutely it makes sense that it's a shared responsibility, but I guess it's making sure that responsibility does get picked up post implementation. We've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to go to the different questions. I'm going to jump to the hidden costs question. So again, an anonymous attendee, but thank you very much for your question. So when considering the cost of HR technology implementations, what are some of the hidden or overlooked expenses that organizations should factor into their return on investment calculations? Aaron, I'm going to go to you on this one, please.
Favorite topic. There's lots. I think a couple of things we touched on already, right, which is the ongoing change capability, ensuring that's there. Ensuring you have the right support capability is definitely one. Don't underestimate the cost of putting the right insights team into your organization. Reporting is one thing, insights is a very different thing, and you need a different caliber and type of person for that. Regression testing, let's not forget that little hidden beauty every time you do a functional release, and however you've wired it, so keep it as simple as possible around that space. And there is a continual list. I think the other one that Dan actually mentioned that sticks with me is, when you go through a journey like this and you upskill your team, immediately they're at risk of going into the market and taking those skills. And so one of the hidden costs is wage inflation. The other is replacement costs, because you will lose some to the market just because they have better skill set now and they realize their value in the market. So there's a few there to chew over. I'm sure my colleagues may have some others to add.
I would add into the mix a sort of service management or case management tool, because often businesses don't have that, or if they do, it needs the capability of it needs to be expanded or extended. So some way to properly log all your queries and making sure that they're being captured and being dealt with and managed appropriately is often overlooked. But again, apart from that, it's that ongoing maintenance that I think that people just kind of forget around that kind of team, the product owner, and the costs that come with that people need to think about.
And I'd say maybe, so we've spoken a lot today about HR technology, but don't forget there's the other side. So there's the process design. That's quite hidden. And I think having the HR folks come away from their day job to rethink a process, because let's face it, you do a big implementation like this once every 10 years. So actually that time is a really good opportunity to go, are our processes robust? Are they fit for purpose? And quite often the answer is going to be no. So I think having the time and spending the money to sit down and rethink some really basic things across the organization. So whether that's a self-service transaction, who's accountable for updating somebody's bank details as a really basic example, the thinking time and pulling the people from HR to go and do that work can be a bit hidden. So I think being upfront about that at the start can help.
I agree, Dan, that we often call out backfill costs explicitly for that purpose, to allow, because you've got to make time, that you lose that time, but also, it's very hard to do side of desk in an intense period. So you often plan for that backfill. So yeah, I agree. It's a great one.
Great. We've got a couple of questions which I think I know how they're going to be answered, but I'm going to ask them anyway. So one from an anonymous attendee, are there any specific industries or sectors where HR technology investments tend to yield higher ROI? And what lessons can us other organizations learn from their success? Does anyone want to jump in there?
I'll give it a go.
I've got
it a go.
but I'm interested in what everyone else thinks.
I hate the terminology, but I can't think of how we say it in the UK, but white collar and blue collar. So where you've got a large organization with lots of, say, retail, that's my background, let's use retail.
Yeah.
You've got tens of thousands of people that are frontline workers that you just need to get into the system, complete the activity and go. I think the impacts there and return on investment are huge because of the scale of the people impacted. And quite often, you know, those of us that are desk-based, we tend to just get on with things and you know, have a little bit more flexibility in when you might complete HR activities, where frontline workers tend to be a little bit more, you know, the hourly based. So the time that they spend doing these activities is costing you ridiculous amounts of money sometimes, per my point before about the million phone calls. So I think that's probably the industries where I see the biggest return of investment. So frontline workers, large install base where you've got tens of thousands of people that are doing similar roles.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think quite often that's tied to rostering, that whole rostering to pay cycle. So I think industries with that you can make a really significant difference. Whether it's shift balancing, whether it's optimizing utilization, whether it's shift sharing, you know, that whole ability to take, and also the back end of correcting pay where people have taken shifts at last minute and all those sort of things. I think, as you say, they tend to be big workforces. They tend to have quite a significant impact, and therefore, if you can get that bit right, that for me is another sector that, you know, quite often has a very strong return on investment. Okay,
thank you both for that. Tom Satterthwaite, sorry, I can't even pronounce names anymore. Tom Satterthwaite has asked a great question. To what degree do cultural aspirations, including way of working, find their way into value ROI definition? And do we have any specific examples of how they get quantified in our experience? Who would like to go first on this one?
Do love this question. I've been pondering it, Tom, since you asked it quite early on in the call, and there's two things that occur to me. One, they don't occur in ROI and value enough. I think they are a byproduct quite often of the change conversation. So, you know, what behaviors do we need to change? What leadership behaviors? What cultural behaviors will happen? There are some specific elements that do come up time and again in HR business cases around culture. They're quite specific. One is around business partners. So it's very hard to put an HR system in that doesn't change the role of a business partner, doesn't change the way in which they engage with their customers afterwards, and therefore there's a whole behavioral mindset, skills and culture change that happens in the business partner area. And I think you need to measure that and be really specific around what you're trying to achieve there to make that happen. And I guess the other one we've talked a little bit about at various points through today is the role of line managers. And there's quite often, I think, a bit of a rabbit hole that people go down here, which is, you know, putting a system in, it's going to move self-service, and therefore everything's going to be dispersed, and you know, there's a whole set of savings to be made. The piece that you've got to factor into that is what's the culture of your organization for line managers, and what are the micro cultures around line managers in your organization? Because in some places, you know, a line manager doing that task absolutely is the wrong thing to do, because they add value to your business in a way that means that you can't use them. Or to Dan's earlier point there, they're in the field and they just simply can't do it in the way that you want, in the time that you want. And I think quite often that piece is missed in a sweeping statement of the savings that can be made around line manager time and the self-service element, and that piece is not factored in. So I do think there's elements around culture there that really need to be thought through to make sure you finesse your answer and your solution, and therefore your business case as well. Great
So
question.
I'm very conscious of time, and we're getting very close to the end of the hour. There is one more question left, but we will answer that post the call. So thank you to Andrew Whelan for his question, but we'll answer that in our.
But I have to say, Chris, just call it out. Andrew's the third time attendee to our webinars, so we will definitely get back to you, Andy.
On screen, you can see a QR code. If you've enjoyed today and you'd like to come along to our fourth in the series of our summer series, webinar 4 is all about future-proofing HR and the different things that you should do there. So please take a picture of the QR code and register. We would love to see you there. As always, a massive thank you to everyone who's asked questions, a massive thank you to everyone who has attended the session, and to our lovely panelists. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much to Dan, to Aaron, and to Bex. Enjoy the sunshine or not, depending on where you are, and have a lovely day. Thank you so much for joining us.